Well, hello everyone. I'm Brownfield's Rhiannon Branch, and I'd like to welcome you to this video series called Navigating Preparation for the 2023 Growing Season. It's a content partnership with Burrus Seed. Today, we're going to focus on agronomic management, and who better to cover those issues than Burrus Seed agronomist Dana Harder. Dana, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Well, we'll go ahead and dive into this and let you kind of introduce yourself to everybody, maybe your coverage area and a little bit about what you do for Burrus.
Yeah, so I'm a field agronomist for Burrus Seed. I primarily cover Missouri, West Central Illinois. So we do a lot of sales support, do a lot of agronomic training to our different customers. And if there's any in-season issues, we kind of help growers along through that. And again, we're always looking for new products, delivering the best solutions to growers going forward. So a little bit of everything, a lot of variety in my role. And I see a lot of different scenarios out there in the growing season, the wide geography. So it's always interesting.
Let's start by kind of recapping the 2022 growing season so far.
Yeah, every year is unique. When we look back at 2022, we think back to planting time. There was a good time frame there in April where growers were able to get started, but as we ran into early May, we had a little bit of weather come in there. So we had some rainfall, made it a little bit later start as a whole for most growers. And for those growers that were doing no-till, they struggled with some burn down, and you didn't see too many fall herbicide programs implemented. So we had some massive winter annuals in those situations. So we had some tall mare's tail. So there were some early season weed control struggles, and there was a lot of windy days during May going into June. So we saw some issues with weed control, and mainly due to the size of the weeds there. So guys had to make multiple applications to get it all controlled. When it came to stand establishment, we had pretty good stands across the board. Guys were, for the most part, pretty successful getting their corn and beans to come up. Definitely less replant throughout my footprint compared to 2021. So that was good news there on that front. You know, if we look back at precipitation, for the most part, all areas or certain geographies experienced some dryness at different time frames throughout what I covered. And during pollination for corn in particular, we saw some really dry conditions, some really hot weather. And depending on when you planted on your maturity, we're seeing some tip back. We are seeing some stress that came into play for pollination. So growers need to be mindful of that. And as we go into August here, if we continue to see some dry weather, we want to be checking those fields for stalk integrity and kind of ward off any pre-harvest issues or stalk, some down corn we might have if we ever stay dry in those areas. As a whole, the good news is we're seeing less disease pressure than what we saw in 2021. The biggest culprit last year was southern rust. And I think with the dry weather, particularly in Arkansas and to the south of us, that kind of kept that corridor from really ramping up. And so that's been good news. In Western Missouri, I've seen some instances of gray being pretty severe. But for the most part, it's been less than what we've been seeing in years past. So that's good. Where we're looking going into harvest, we're kind of behind heat units to like May 12th, but then we've been picking them up steadily. So right now we're trending about 4 to 5 days ahead of schedule. And unless we turn really cool in August, I can see harvest progressing earlier than what we usually see here. So there's some good news out there. I mean, if we're seeing harvest come earlier, it could be less money spent on gas drying products during that harvest time frame there.
A lot to think about here as we're in the second half of the 2022 season, and yet 2023 is already on the minds of farmers. What kind of preparation is being done this time of year for the following season?
Yeah, like I said, every year is different. We'll look into the magic 8 ball and kind of see what we think will happen in 2023. Right now, in this August timeframe, you're seeing some early pricing roll out. You're seeing fall and hydrous price getting rolled out, and there's some relief from spring prices, but it's definitely higher from last fall. And I think with the inflationary situation you see us in, I think everything's going to be elevated. So guys are going to have to be good managers, managing that dollar, getting the best return on their investment. With early order coming up, it's an opportunity to save money. Some of your biggest discounts take on during that time frame. So if you got the cash flow, it's a good opportunity to lock up some of those products, those inputs going forward. There were some supply chain issues in 2022. We kind of on the crop protection and on the fertility side of things, you kind of anticipate that going into 2023. And I think you'll see growers be more proactive going forward, locking in more early order, putting on more fall anhydrous. There was a little bit more speculation going into 2022 where they thought we'd have a price reset. But the biggest thing is seeing what we have for pricing, see what programs are out there and locking them up. And you'll be in a good situation when spring rolls around for 2023.
You mentioned it there, kind of comparing it to last year. Do you have any other, compare and contrast scenarios for, preparing for 2023, looking back the past several years?
Yeah, I think going into 2023, there were some guys really focusing on fertility costs there, and they might have cut back there. I think with where we're at, going 2 years into that, you really can't do that. So spending your money on good soil testing, knowing where you're sufficient and where you need to prop some fertility there, is going to be important. And I think just understanding what you need to do to raise a good crop and focusing on that money there. And for the most part, we're going to be in the same situation, I think, as 2022 for cost and for supply chain. But I think the biggest things can be the mindset changing for those growers. I think they're more ready for it. They realize everything's gone up. So has the cost of production for a lot of these products. And until that really changed, we're in the same mold as 2022.
Dana, we really want to put a focus on agronomic management here. So from, an agronomist perspective, let's talk about where growers should put their money to get the most value, where they should not be cutting corners and how they can reduce costs but still raise yields.
Yeah, that's always a tricky one. Where do you make that balance? You always want to do the best that you can do, but if you start cutting back on stuff, where is that line? And again, it depends on some of the weather conditions and some of that. If we have challenging growing conditions, some of those cuts really show up, and they'll show up late season, both corn and soybeans. Especially where you have that stress, things really show. So as I mentioned earlier, having a solid fertility program, and it's going to take more boots in the field to do this kind of stuff. So soil testing, that's going to pay dividends. When inputs go up, doing your homework and knowing where you stand for soil fertility and grid sampling, that tells you where you're at, and then you know how to manage going forward. So knowing, especially on potash and DAP, knowing where you're at there for sufficiency levels and where you're lacking, they'll help get you the best return on investment there. When it comes to nitrogen and corn, there's some really good tools. I really don't like skimping on in, but there's a good tool called Maximum Return to Nitrogen, where it takes into account the pricing, tells you the biggest bang for your buck based on that application rate. And again, looking when you get it in season based on the weather conditions, it's split applying in and using it when you need it is key. So if we run some wet conditions, bumping up that side dress application will pay dividends versus putting it all up front. Doing due diligence when it comes to pricing, knowing what's in crop protection products, know what actives are there, and comparing, contrasting prices and taking advantage of those early season discounts. You can get some good products. You can get them at a better value. They'll help you be in a better position coming in spring. And I think having built-in protection, particularly when it comes to hybrids and varieties, again, we talked about the low disease pressure in 2022. That doesn't mean it's going to be the case in 2023. If we looked at 2021, we had a lot of disease. Depending on the weather pattern going forward, having that built-in protection will pay dividends. So looking for good gray tolerance in corn, good southern rust, good tar spot ratings, that'll put you in premium position versus having to splurge for crop protection products. When it comes to IPM, insect pest management, I think you'll see growers implement more of an active scouting approach. I think we've been pushing the easy button and just doing a blanket approach and putting that spend out there. But as borrowing costs go up, input costs go up, I think knowing what the situation is out in the field, and again, that takes boots out in the field, you'll have a better ROI using that active IPM approach versus the blanket approach going forward.
Again, a lot to keep in mind there. I imagine that some producers might need some help and guidance on some of those situations. Who do you recommend they talk to? What kind of network should they have going into this season to kind of help guide on some of those decisions?
I think having a strong relationship with your consultants, your seed sales people, your crop input providers. They see a lot of acres, they see a lot of growers, they know what's working, and then give you insight, and to give you the best recommendation for your program, for your farm. And so that's going to pay dividends having those relationships there. There's many other sources you can go to for information, but having those close contacts that are out there in the industry can really pay dividends during these time frames. There's some sources online for disease. As we get in season, corn IPM pipe is good for southern rust, tar spot management. So as you get into that fungicide application season, you can see how some of those diseases are progressing and make some insight compared to years past and how that compares and contrasts. That's a great resource I like to use. Social media, if you go to Burrus Seed, we have a Twitter, Facebook account. We provide in-season updates and kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. And some great resources when it comes to scouting and where are those thresholds and where do I need to pull the trigger on those crop protection or insect pest management products going forward. So those are some good resources, and just using the context that you have out there. There's a lot of places to get info.
Danny, you mentioned crop input prices and inflation. Are there any other challenges, kind of in the broader industry right now that producers should be keeping in mind as we go into 2023? And if so, anything they can do to prepare for those?
I think for the most part on the seed supply things, I think things are pretty good for the most part. But again, we'll really know when October rolls around. And, anything you can do to lock up and have that product in hand is worth quite a bit going forward. It's just hard knowing what 2023 is going to bring. But if you can lock up your products, know what you get for pricing and return on your commodity and what your costs are going forward and managing those costs, that's going to pay dividends. I think the biggest thing is just being diversified and knowing anything could change in 2023 and just being prepared and reactive and to what that season brings you.
I always kind of like to look at the opposite end of the spectrum here. What are the consequences if we're not planning ahead?
Well, sometimes you get lucky. I'll say that does happen. But, being prepared, you get more lucky than not being prepared. And that's always the key thing there. So if you have a game plan, you have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, you'll know which way to turn when those challenges come up. And, it's always good to have that for every situation that could come up, and just knowing what your costs are, knowing what your yield levels are. And again, Mother Nature is going to throw a curve at you. So just being able to respond to all those different pressures that are out there. And, that's part of agriculture as a whole.
Dana, do you have anything else you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
Some things that are on people's mind. If you look at the drought monitor, we'll see what, the fall brings and the winter brings. But we might be in a situation where you might want to manage for soil moisture going forward into the spring. Again, we might get timely rainfall, but there's a lot of dryness out there in the Western Corn Belt. So being aware of that going forward. Another key thing I want to stress on is weed resistant management. As you heard, we had some struggles early in the season for 2022. And with high input prices, you got growers maybe more reluctant to pull the trigger and put multiple modes of action in their herbicide programs. That's just something that's going to pay dividends if you put multiple modes of action and spend the money there to have a good herbicide program, because you could pay for it with late season weed control. And ultimately, we want to protect the technologies that we have out there. So just a good herbicide management program and going out there when those weeds are at the right size is really key to protecting that technology out there.
You mentioned some resources earlier for those that are interested in, learning some more about Burrus and from you guys, what you've got going on. Can you maybe share your website and social channels with us?
Yeah, so our website's burrusseed.com. So you can see some really good grower resources, grower tools for in-season scouting, what diseases pop up when. So it's a good link to some of our social media channels through Twitter and Facebook at Burrus Seed. And you can also follow me at Harder Dana on Twitter as well.
Very good. Well, we appreciate your time today, Dana, and kind of your expert insight on how to help prepare for the 2023 growing season. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in and encourage you to check out the rest of the video series, which will include grower perspectives and some Burrus business solutions. You can find all of those at brownfieldagnews.com.